All right, everybody, welcome back into the Leading into Leadership podcast. This is episode 204, and my guest on the show today is Will Parker. And we'll get to Will here in a second, but a reminder that this show is all about helping leaders just like you lean fully into your purpose, lead with clarity, and build culture where everybody thrives. And that's what I do through Road to Awesome. That's what my work is all about, partnering with school and district leaders to gain clarity, get teams in alignment, and to be truly intentional with the work that matters most. Now, if that sounds like something your school or your team could use right now, let's talk. Go to roadtoawesome.net and click Contact Us, or just simply reach out. Shoot me a DM on social media or email me, Darrin@roadtoawesome.net. Now, let's get on to today's episode. This is a conversation I've been looking forward to for a long time. My guest is William D. Parker, the founder of Principal Matters, LLC. Now, Will is an award-winning former principal. He's a speaker, author, executive coach, and host of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast, which has over 1.5 million downloads, which is absolutely staggering how many downloads that Will has with the School Leaders Podcast, Principal Matters. It's a fantastic show. It's one of my favorites. Will is someone that I really admire in the leadership space. And, we cover so much ground in this episode, from overcoming some burnout to leading with intention and scaling your impact without losing yourself in the process. So fabulous episode. Can't wait to share this with you. So let's get right to it with Will Parker. All right, my friends, welcome back into the Leaning into Leadership podcast. My guest on the show today is Will Parker, who is the founder of Principals Matters, LLC. Will's an author, educator, speaker, executive coach, does all of that amazing work. Former award-winning principal, Oklahoma educator. Will is one of those people who I look at in the space and say, man, when I grow up, I want to be Will Parker. And I had the opportunity to finally meet Will in person, although it was a quick, you walk past somebody in a hotel lobby, kind of. In fact, that's exactly what it was, except maybe up, on a different floor. But finally, the opportunity to sit down and have a conversation here with Will Parker on the podcast. Will, thanks so much for joining me on Leaning into Leadership.
Darrin, it's an honor to be with you, and I hope you don't grow up to be like me, because you're way cooler. But it's such an honor to sit in the room with you, and thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's do this just really quick. I mean, I hit a few of the highlights there, but maybe I guess jump in the Wayback Machine as far as you want to go and
Sure.
fill in the gaps for our listeners on Will Parker.
Yeah, I grew up in Northwest Tennessee. My dad was a Navy guy, but also a farmer. And so from, my formative years were living on the farm. And then when I was in high school, Dad went back in the Navy. And so I lived in New York and Virginia, and then back to Tennessee, and then came to Oklahoma to go to school, to university, and stayed here to become a teacher. And, not a lot of people know this, Darrin, but when I stepped into teaching, I thought it was a part-time gig. I was like, I'll do that for a few years, because it's my degree's in it. I love language arts, but I'm not sure if teaching is what I want to do. But it's something that I can do. And it was about the 6th year of that career that I realized I loved it, and it had become a passion. I became the teacher of the year in that building. And but then, when we had kids and I started looking at the trajectory of my career, I decided that school administration was kind of that next step. So I started investigating that, got my master's degree, became an assistant principal at a large high school south of Tulsa with about 1,400 kids, and then eventually was invited to join a school north of Tulsa in a smaller community in Skiatook, and was the AP there for a wonderful principal who, when she retired, I took that position, was the high school principal there. And so, so for 24 years, my K-12 experience was high school. And then in 2017, I got invited to become the director of our State Principals Association. So I was the executive director of Oklahoma's Association for Secondary School Principals, and our middle level education. We had a separate chapter for them. And I did that for 6 years, while at that same time I had already begun a blog and a podcast and was writing books on school leadership. And so That work led to opportunities a lot like what you have, to keynote and to coach and to lead masterminds and what I call leadership academies. And so in 23, that opened up for me full time. So for the last 2 full years, I've spent most of my time with leaders across the U.S. A lot of that work is done virtually. A lot of that work's done in person. Usually I'm only traveling once or twice a month. So I have probably about 20 leadership sessions a month, and the majority of them are with groups virtually like this. So that's a really fast snapshot of 30
Yeah.
years of my work, but that's kind of what's led me to where I'm at today.
Yeah. So I'm curious. Let's go back to that transition from assistant principal to principal. So you did it in the
Mhm,
same building, which is
mhm.
similar to my story. I did the same thing, and I know I know the stories or the struggles that I had in that transition, and my regular listeners know because I've told the story a handful of times, a handful of different ways here on the show. But I'm curious. You don't typically say I want to go support principals more because it was just a walk in the park. It's typically there's something there. So I want to talk about that. I want to have you talk about maybe that transition. What were maybe some of the challenges that you faced, and how did you overcome those?
That's such a great question. So I'll take you back because when I stepped into the work of school admin, and I felt like I had been a strong, effective, highly effective teacher. Um, I think that that transition to school leadership was one that I had studied hard. I worked on my master's. I had interviewed so many veteran leaders to try to get a sense for what I was getting ready to expect. And it didn't seem to matter how much I prepared, Darren. It was so hard, much harder than I anticipated. And and maybe there's somebody out there that found school leadership was easier than they expected. I've never met them. Um, and
No.
so all those things that you prepare for, you just find that the rapid number of situations and circumstances and conflicts they just come so fast that that it can paralyze you in some ways. Um, So what I did as a response to that was what I did as a young teacher. I just dug in. I was just like, I'll invest more time. I'll spend more energy. I'll work harder, because that's what it takes to get a really hard job done. But what I discovered was that very first year was not just a year of learning and commitment, um, but it was a sacrifice, and a sacrifice that I was willing to make, and my family was willing to make with me. My wife was a former teacher, so she knew what the investment would be and the sacrifice would be. But what happened was I began to sacrifice everything. I mean, my health, my time with my family, my spiritual growth, my I was gaining weight. I had higher cholesterol. I was having blood pressure problems. All this stuff I was falling apart. And I didn't realize I was until I was actually in the middle of my second year. And one night I'd come home late from a school event, those nights are, and I'd just been running all day long, putting out fires. And I sat down after the kids went to bed to do what I would do every night, Darren, which was every night after bedtime, I would open up my laptop and work until I couldn't stay awake any longer. And then collapse into bed and get up as early as I could and start all over again. And that night I sat down and opened up my laptop, and my wife, Missy, sat down beside me, and she said, "Can we just have a conversation?" And I was like, "Sure." So I shut the laptop, and she said, "Well, the kids and I have decided that you are a husband and a dad on the weekends only. The rest of the time, the school just owns you." And she didn't say it with like bitterness. She wasn't being mean at all. This was just simple resignation. This is the new reality. And she said, "In fact, you have become a shell of the man that you used to be." And Darren, when she went to bed that night, I opened up that laptop, and instead of working, which is what I had been doing, I wrote a letter of resignation. And in that letter, I explained to my principal, my board members, my superintendent, that I have not found a way to do this work effectively without sacrificing my family, my own health, um, the things most important to me. And if I wasn't able to figure out a better solution, I would be leaving this to find another profession. And took that letter and I printed it, and I took it to my office and I put it on in a folder and I set it on my desk. And it stayed there the rest of the year. And every day I would walk in and look at that letter, and I would tell myself, I'm either going to do this differently, or this is the letter that I'm going to be handing in at the end of the school year. And what it forced me to do, Darren, was begin to revisit those priorities that I knew I needed to revisit, but hadn't had the push to do it. which meant getting up early in the morning again and taking care of my health and fitness, packing a lunch so that I had something nutritious to eat during the school day, inviting people to sit down with me and actually having conversations and building relationships around food or fun or whatever that to have through the day, looking for things to celebrate among kids and teachers. All those things you and I have talked about in other settings too as friends. But for listeners, what it caused me to do was to begin to reconnect with the things that kept me plugged in as a person. And and you know what happens? What happens, Darrin, when you start pouring into yourself? You become a better leader. I became more creative. I became more efficient. I became better at the work I was doing because I suddenly was reconnecting with the things that kept me healthy. And, 7 years later, when I was given the award as Oklahoma's Assistant Principal of the Year, I wasn't I was so aware of the fact when I got to take my wife and kids with me to Washington, D.C. for that awards ceremony. And we had an evening awards event where we got to have our photos taken together. And so I invited my family into the photo. And I'll never forget when I saw them, I'm in a tux and Missy's in her evening gown and the kids are in their Sunday clothes, looking at them and realizing I wouldn't be standing here if we hadn't had that conversation that night, if I hadn't written that letter, if I hadn't made this commitment. And so when you ask me why I spend so much time now investing in leaders, it's because I learned a lot through that process over the years of, the next 13, 14 years of administrative work that I want to be able then to say to a younger leader or even an experienced leader, hey, let's reflect together on ways you can do this and still not lose yourself in the process.
It's so important that we take the time to pour into ourselves and take the time to not forget that we are, husbands and fathers and, or, wives and mothers. I mean, so many leaders, like probably 99% make that same mistake. We all fall into, I mean, honestly, your story, we, as we're recording this, we just recorded on your podcast, me being on yours, and there's so many parallels in our story, and I'm sure Jess and I had that same conversation, and I mean I never wrote the letter. That is really powerful. But leaders, I think this is what I want you to take from what Will just shared. You don't have to get to that point. Let this be your wake up call. For me, I mean, it was, my second year, Christmas of my second year, I was supposed to be in my best friend's wedding. And I was so sick, I could not attend. I missed my best friend's wedding because I was so sick. And also, as it turned out, just to run with your story a little bit too, when I later put on the outfit I was supposed to wear, we purchased them in the summer. It didn't fit. I'd gained so much weight. Just, leaders, so many of you know exactly what Will and I are talking about here. Just let this be your wake-up call, please. Don't wait for that other one, right? Don't wait for, my friend Sean Gaylord tells a story about, him, being rushed to the hospital, having a, cardiac event in a hallway in his school. We don't need to do that. Take care of yourself, for goodness sakes,
I mean, and it can happen at any time. Brute Cafelli, whose work I just absolutely love, he tells the story of, not just when he was a school leader, but even when he stepped into the work that he does now supporting leaders, that he collapsed he had a heart attack on stage. Because even pouring into the work of other leaders, he had become so committed to that work that he had forgotten to take a step back and really take care of myself. And now he's super healthy. But all these seasons of our life, we'll never do it perfectly, Darrin. And so one of the things that has just become such an important commitment to me is consistent reflection on just pausing. My third book is called Pause, Breathe, Flourish, Living Your Best Life as an Educator, because I just think it's so important for us to take a pause and to just reflect on where we are and where we want to go. And then some of the actions that we can take to move forward with intention. And it's such important work. And the people that we work with, educators or caring professionals who are making incredible impact in the lives of other people. All of us remember the people that have changed our lives as educators and coaches and leaders. So the work never loses its importance, and your commitment to making an impact doesn't change. But if you want to make an impact that's sustainable, then we've got to be willing to just take a step back and then reflect on what are the things that I can do that can make this sustainable over time, and that's those intentions, just like the intentions we have for leading and caring for schools, we have to take care of the delivery part of that too. And not just us as leaders, your teachers need to be told this too. And there, we need to have cultures that we create for the people whom we lead and serve, where they're encouraged to take care of themselves as well.
Absolutely. It's so important. And we're in a time right now where many are leaving the profession, whether that's teachers, administrators, and so forth. And you have a new book that I think really maybe ties back into some of the maybe some of the reasons that some people leave. Yeah, I've heard from a number of people who have left, because of, various things like, I'm not able to do what I want to be able to do, or there's, these types of restrictions, or the board says this, or, there's all these political pressures and that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. But so much of that is stuff that they don't have control of. And, certainly getting into whose permission are you waiting for? An educator's guide to doing what you love, to me, really kind of felt like wait a minute. Why don't you focus on what you can control and quit worrying about all this other stuff you can't? So
Yes.
that's my take, but I want to kind of hear that, like the beginning of like why this book, why now, and then there's some pieces in the book I want to talk about, but I
Sure.
want to have you
Sure.
just maybe kind of share a little
Yeah.
bit about the book.
Thank you, Darren. It's funny because this will be one of the very first podcasts that I've had since the book came out. And you know how when you're trying to frame your conversations around how do I explain very succinctly what took me 2 years to write and what took me 20 chapters to unload, it's so hard. But let me just start with this. A good friend of mine, because I sent this book out for reviews, and one of my friends is a educator of a Catholic school in Brisbane, Australia. Her name is Anne Marie Ma. And we connected several years ago, I think during the pandemic. She had read my last book, Pause, Breathe, Flourish. And so I had sent her a copy of this book to read just because I wanted some feedback from practicing principles. And when she wrote me back, she said, Will, I feel like Pause, Breathe, Flourish was a book that you wrote from the trauma that you had experienced through leadership, and then had figured out ways to move from that to a thriving career in school education. She said, I feel like this book is written from your triumphs. Um, and and so let me try to explain what I mean by that, Darren. The last 3 years, especially, I've spent a lot of time coaching leaders, especially, I'm just going to say, highly effective, hardworking leaders. It's like the biggest privilege in my life to think I get to spend the day talking to people that I just admire them so much. But what I've discovered is that even the most experienced, the most highly effective leaders, award-winning leaders, have really hard questions that they're still trying to solve. They have really difficult challenges that they're trying to figure out how to navigate. They have really important decisions in front of them, pathways that they're trying to figure out the best options for. And sometimes that includes even their own career paths. Should I continue doing this? Should I do this? Should I do this? And so what I've found myself doing is a lot of times those conversations are leading me to giving similar advice to leaders as I'm talking to them about some of these same shared challenges. And so that's usually when I write a book, is when I'm like, okay, what are the things I'm finding myself saying over and over again to the same people? Maybe this needs to be a resource. So I just sat down a couple of years ago and I just wrote out, okay, what are the main themes that I'm covering with these leaders over and over again? And it didn't take me long to brainstorm 20 different areas of emphasis that I want to make sure I'm communicating in these conversations, which became this book. And so the term "whose permission are you waiting for" is really if I'm coaching someone, it's usually the part of the conversation that comes near the end, not the beginning. But so I put it as the title of the book, but you really need to have a longer conversation before you get to this question, but I'll go there anyway, which is so often when we do have time to reflect, when we do have time for feedback, when we do have clarity on the steps we need to take next, then that question's so important. Well, whose permission are you waiting for? Because so often people know what they want, They're just waiting for someone to tell them to do it. And my heart's you know cry at this point with them is do it. If you see what that thing is that needs to happen next, you don't need anybody's permission to do it. Now, even saying that, I'm feeling some tension because someone might think, well, yeah, I do. I need my superintendent's permission, or I need my director's permission, or I need my parents' permission. And I'm just going to push back by saying, when it comes to the values and the integrity you have and what you know is best for kids, do that, because you don't need somebody's permission to step out into your building and begin to exercise those values and those intentions and have those conversations that can lead to that improvement that needs to happen. Yes, maybe you need someone's permission to approve a budget, or someone's permission to start a new program, or someone's permission to take a new job, or whatever. But the things that you want to be doing and experiencing, often the barrier that you're waiting for is your own permission to just begin to do the thing that you would love to do in that moment for yourself or for the people that you're serving. So I'll start there, Darrin, as my very weak attempt to try to explain why I chose that
Oh
title.
no, that's a very, very strong, not just attempt. That's a very, very strong way to describe that. And we were talking before we hit the record button. Just in my time that I had to kind of review a little bit of what's in the book. One of the chapters that really resonated strongly with me was chapter 3. And in chapter 3, you're really getting into, and you hit kind of one of the things that means so much to me, which is just that whole idea of being curious, with leading with curiosity and coupling that with inquiry and how that leads to discovery. I've told the listeners here that one of the biggest things for me when we go in classrooms is just simply be curious. Don't think you have to tell everybody what to do. Just be curious. So this chapter really resonated with me. So
Yeah.
I'd like to have you talk just a little bit more about that formula of those three pieces.
Thank you. I begin that chapter with a story of a documentary that I watched several years ago about a couple who were farmers out in California, and John and Molly Chester. And it's a documentary called The Biggest Little Farm. And John Chester is also a great filmmaker. So they had the opportunity to accomplish their life dream. They had both always wanted to start a small farm. They wanted a sustainable farm, though, one that didn't rely on just like a solo crop, or they also wanted a farm that could be very sustainable naturally without a lot of pesticides. And so they bought this land. It was desolate when they bought it. It had been just so over used with chemicals that the ground was just hard. And so they removed a lot of the old vegetation that was there, and they planted a lot of new areas. They built this incredible composting system. They brought in farm animals to help create a better ecosystem for the farm. But they had an old farmer, Alan York, who was mentoring them at the time. And this is the part that I actually watched this 3 times, Darrin, because the leadership lessons were so good. But Alan York was their coach. He was mentoring them, and this old farmer. And he told them this. He said, the more complexities that you can create in a farming system, the more the farm itself will begin to sustain itself. The systems help sustain themselves. And he said something that stuck out to me, which is that over time, you're going to discover that the more you can understand those complexities and help them complement each other, your work will get easier over time. But it'll never get simpler. And so I was holding on to that story because I've often, when I'm thinking about the work of school, I'm thinking about the work that we do in lives, so often we come up against hard situations and we get stumped. And we expect that at some point something magic's going to happen, and it's all just going to someday be so easy. And so the first lesson they had to learn was, no matter how great your systems become and how great if this farm ever becomes profitable and sustainable, just already do away with the idea that it's ever going to be easy. It's never easy. Hard work is never easy, but it can become simpler. And then the part for them where the simplicity began to be experienced for them actually came in year 7. It's 7 years, Darren, that it took them to get to the
Wow.
place where their farm was super profitable and became kind of that simpler model for them. And one of the things that was a big takeaway from their experience was they learned a lot about farming, and their mentor taught them a lot too. But there were sometimes things that they ran up against that they couldn't find the answer. They couldn't research it or Google it fast enough to find the answer for this, or maybe pick up the phone and call somebody for an answer. And so John Chester said in the documentary something that resonated with me. He said, when I would run up to those hardest moments, maybe a crop that wasn't doing what I wanted it to, or maybe these pests that we are trying to get rid of or whatever, I stopped searching and I just started walking my farm. I would just go stand there and examine it and study it and spend time in that environment. And eventually I would get an idea. And maybe that's, I need to bring in some owls to become predators for these pests, or I need to do this that I hadn't done before with this plant. And so it was those moments of staying curious and walking the farm and asking good questions and thinking deeply, where he began to discover the answer. So let me apply this to our work. You know, you're listening to this today and you're in a school or you're on a pathway or whatever. And so often we just want the answers. Just tell me what to do. You know, so I'm going to call Will. I'm going to call Darren. I'm going to read this book. I'm going to watch this video. I'm going to listen to a podcast. I'm going to go to this conference. And all those things are super important. We need mentors. We need resources. But we also need to remember that the things that have always worked in learning, they work for us as leaders. What do the best classrooms have happening in them, Darren? They have teachers that are sparking curiosity in kids, who are asking hard questions, who are then going to try to figure out the answers to those things. And then they're going to discover new knowledge and they're going to apply it and they're going to try it. They're going to take a risk and experiment with it. And then they're going to have an aha moment. And then they're going to use that new knowledge and apply it in a new way. And they're going to reflect on that. And maybe if this is really good learning, I can take this and use it the rest of my life. That's the ideal for learning, not let me read a textbook and answer these questions and fill out this standardized test. If we know that's what great learning looks like in a classroom, then let's do that as leaders. So when I'm struggling with what's happening at this part of my school, how about I go there and just hang out and sit for a while and listen and watch and ask probing questions and lean in to that moment of difficulty instead of running from it or looking for somebody to rescue me from that moment. And so for me, curiosity plus inquiry leads to discovery is just that formula. It's just a formula that I think works over and over and over again, whether it's in problem solving, whether it's in career planning, or whether it's in school improvement.
Yeah, that one, like I said, really, really resonated with me. And I want to take what you just talked about, and I want to go ahead and go with one more question. I was going to go right to the, how you leaning into leadership, but I want to ask one more. Yeah. And specifically this one, I want to connect to what you talk about in chapter 17. So as leaders begin to really have their footing, to really understand what the role really means, and no, it doesn't ever get easier, but yes, it can become more simplistic because you're really focused on what matters. One of those next pieces, for me at least, was how do I scale my influence? And you talk about in chapter 17, scaling your influence as a leader. Mm-hmm. Maybe talk just a little bit to those leaders who they're getting their footing. They're feeling strong about, now I'm not just firefighting. I truly am starting to lead my school. How do we apply that, scaling our influence?
Yeah. I'm grabbing chapter 17 so that I'm sure that I'm speaking to the same things that you are, but I'll just say it this way. And I'm going to sound like a preacher, but I just got to say what's on my heart. Everybody's an expert at something, Darren. They just are. And in education, over time, if you're good at this work, you begin to learn skills that maybe become second nature to you, but they're not second nature to someone else. And so those expertise that you're building in whatever the job is you have, or the skill you have, or the craft that you have, I just think you have a responsibility to pass it on to somebody. And so if you hold that knowledge to yourself, I think it's selfish. And so I think that part of the responsibility that we have to scale our influence is to pass on what we've learned to other people who can then add it to their toolkit or add it to their skill sets or increase their abilities in their own crafts too. Um, and what I've discovered, and this, I don't know if this will, how to apply this to listeners. I'm just going to make it personal. But what I've discovered is when I make a commitment to pass along what I'm learning to other people, my influence grows too through the people that I'm helping. And so I'll make this really practical because I had this thought the other day. I don't know why I was thinking this, but I think because I've had some people say these things out to me out loud. I've had friends say to me, well, it's surprising how much you elevate other people. Like you spend so much of your time like showcasing other people's talents or introducing people to other people or connecting friends with friends or and I think the implication might be in those comments. One, it's a compliment. I appreciate it. I think the other one though, maybe, are you losing business? You keep like you're sitting, you hear you have this coaching business and this presentation business. And I'm all the time recommending, hey, call my friend, because he would be great speaking at your event, or call my friend who would be great, or call my friend because she would just do amazing work for you. But I think there's a reciprocal principle that happens there, Darrin. One is that I think we have a responsibility to share our expertise, but there's also something that happens when you promote the work of others. It grows your own. It just automatically gives your farm gets bigger when you're helping somebody else expand theirs. And so I think that's just an important principle to hold on to. And then I think the last thing I would say is that when we trust other people in the ways that we've invested in them, and we get to watch them grow, there's a selfish benefit to that too. And I'm not trying to be manipulative, but one of the things I've discovered in this, even in the work I'm doing now, is that I grow when others grow. I just do. I almost always end up getting more opportunities, more invitations, more chances to connect with people that I want to connect with. And so now I'm a business owner, I realize too that those same principles that work in school work as you build a company or a business, because so that whole idea of scaling influence, I think, is something that as leaders, give yourself permission to recognize the expertise you have and share it with someone else. Give yourself permission to elevate and lift up other people that are doing great work and showcase them and utilize those strengths, because it makes everybody better. And then recognize too that the benefit for you is in those relationships that you're building. Then you're both benefiting from it, because I grew up on a farm. So if I'm helping you keep your farm going well, when you need help, you're going to pitch in and help me when I need help on mine.
I love that answer so much. We began our day together, not even having hit record on your podcast. We recorded yours first before mine, and you said something like, you and I are very much walking the same path, running the same race. And just listening to you talk about that right there, the scaling of influence. I mean, I'm over here just like beaming. I'm like, going our old school Arsenio Hall over here, with everything that you just said, because that's everything you just said, I think, is so much a core belief that I carry as well. And I think that, again, that's probably why that chapter resonated with me so much as well. So, man, Will, our time has just absolutely flown by, as I figured that it probably would. So now I am going to ask you the same question I ask everybody here on the podcast. It's always the final question, and it is, how are you leaning into leadership right now?
Yeah. Man, I want to lean in. I want to tell you, one of the ways I've been leaning into leadership has been by inviting leaders to reflection. And Darrin, you and I talked about this on my podcast, one of the tools that you use for reflection. I'm going to share with you one of my tools. And this is one that I learned from a great book by Michael Bungay Stanier called The Coaching Habit. And he has 7 questions that he asks when he's doing this for business coaching. And my good friend Glenn Absher, who's the executive director of Oklahoma's Elementary Education Association. We read this book together back when I worked for our State Principals Association, and we used this book in some of the coaching trainings that we did. And I don't know, I fell in love with it so much that I actually keep these questions sitting on my desk all the time. They're just right here. So when someone calls me, they've got coffee stains on it and everything. If someone calls me and they're like, Will, I need help or I want to reflect, I'll say, okay, hold on. And I'll pull out my questions. And here they are. I'm just going to read them out loud, but they help lead discussion. Question 1, what's on your mind? Question 2, what else is on your mind? Question 3, what's the real challenge here for you? Question 4, what do you want? Question 5, how can I help? Question 6, if you're going to say yes to this, what are you going to say no to? And question 7, what was the most useful for you when reflecting together? So, Darrin, where I've been leaning in, man, especially the last 3 years, is I've been really leaning in, inviting leaders to reflection. Because what I've discovered is I don't always have the answer, but what I can provide is a safe place for leaders to reflect because they don't always have somebody to reflect with who can just be that unfiltered or, that unbiased. Sometimes you can call your team in and try to reflect, but sometimes you just need somebody who can listen, who doesn't know everything. And what I've discovered is in that safe space of reflection, leaders have aha moments where they suddenly become aware they already have the answer. They just needed somebody to help them get it out of their own heads. And then they just need to strategize from that point on. So that's another chapter in the book of how I've used coaching as a way to help me help leaders determine what it is that they want to do. It's helped me. Sometimes I'll do that as a self-reflection practice because ultimately, if we're looking for permission to do what we love, then we've got to be clear on what we love. We got to be clear on what it is that we want. We have to be clear on what that next step needs to be before we can take that action. So that's something I've been leaning into.
That's fantastic right there. And you're hitting one of my favorite areas, which is clarity. So I love that so much. So, man, this is just so much fun, so much good stuff. Folks, I know you've absolutely loved this episode and you're going to want to get in touch with Will Parker. So Will, tell them just real quick about the podcast and how they can find you and all of that great stuff.
Yeah, all my resources are at my website, which is my name, williamdparker.com. And there you'll find more than 400 episodes of podcasts that we've done for several years. Jen Schwanke co-hosts my podcast with me now. She's a wonderful leader from Dublin, Ohio, and the author of several great books on school leadership. And man, I just would love to connect. If there's any leaders out there who want to just do some reflection together, no strings attached, they certainly can reach out to me through my email address at will@williamdparker.com. And so, Darrin, those are the easiest ways to get a hold of me. I'm on social media, but my website's usually the easiest way to find me.
Outstanding. All right. Thank you so much, Will, for joining me here on the Leaning into Leadership podcast.
Thank you, brother.
Man, what a great episode. I sure appreciate Will coming on. I really enjoyed that conversation. And I know I talked about it in the episode, but man, Will was somebody that I really had been wanting to get connected with, that, obviously we had that social media connection, and to finally run into him last summer in Austin, Texas was really cool, but I didn't get to spend much time with him. So I look forward to my next opportunity to sit down, maybe have a meal, a beverage, whatever the case may be, with Will Parker and spend some time in person. But again, really appreciate Will coming on to the podcast. Make sure you check out his new book. All of the stuff that is Will Parker is down in the show notes. And now it's time for a pep talk. So I shared a video earlier in the week, something that I just happened to run into. I was out shooting a handful of videos for content this week, and where I had parked was in front of a business here in Omaha, Nebraska. And when I came back to my car, I noticed that they had a sign, like reserved parking, right? And we see those everywhere we go. We see all kinds of, visitor parking or reserved for the principal or reserved for the superintendent or whatever. But this particular company, the very first 3 spots in their parking lot closest to their main entrance were reserved for expectant mothers. And I just found this so fascinating. I thought, oh my gosh, think about the message that sends about the value that they have about family. Think about the message that sends not only to their employees, but also to any prospective customers, clients, visitors to their building. And it made me think a little bit about the signs that we put up in our parking lot, the signs we put on the sides of our buildings, the signs we put up inside of our schools. What are the signs that we're putting up saying to the people who come into our building, either as people who work in our building on a regular basis or the people who come and visit our building as people from the outside? I would challenge you this week to take a look at the signs that you have around your organization and tell me what it is that you think those signs are saying. What's the message you're trying to convey? What's the culture you're trying to build in your organization? And do those signs align with what you say you're trying to build? I think it's a worthwhile audit, folks. I really do. I think it's worth checking out. I think it's definitely worth spending a little bit of time taking a look at the signs and say, hey, do they align with who we say we are? That's what I've got for you this week. Folks, thank you so much for joining me here on the Leaning into Leadership podcast. Get out there and have a road to awesome week.